Thank you for coming. I hope I try to do this presentation really dynamic, so it's interesting for everybody. So yeah, like my fieldwork was in Colombia, what is the country where I'm from. And the reason why I wanted to focus on regeneration is because even if my master's degree is in sustainable development, the conclusion is sustainability is not enough anymore. So on its own. So we need to like check what is happening after that. Why we should be focusing our efforts from now. So 2811 is an organization that is based in Germany, Colombia, Chile, United States. It's working in different parts of the world, and their mission is to create regenerative development. That's their target. So my challenge was to help them to improve this program that they're launching for the first time called 2811 Ventures to accelerate businesses that are focusing on working to advance regenerative development. So which one was my first approach or what I initially was thinking? I was thinking more like a cycle that 2011 Ventures can be accelerating these different companies, and then I can connect different stakeholders and make this cycle like better, which was just the initial approach with my first conceptual contextual framework. 2811, the reason of the name is because it was in November 28th that in Chile, that is where this organization was starting. In 2015, 28th of November was the day when the resources that were expected to be used for the whole year were over. And each year, that date is coming quicker. And in each country is different. So that's the reason why they started like this organization in Chile, focusing on regenerative development. So for me, the challenge was, okay, how we can help these companies to measure or to evaluate if they are progressing towards this regenerative development. So I started doing a lot of research, checking different organizations, efforts internationally that are trying to like have a standard to know how close an organization, specifically in the private sector, is creating this regenerative development. So first, this is a paper published last year that is talking about regenerative contribution units. That for me was the best finding because it was like checking the way that we can understand in different industries how we are taking from nature so that we're not only sustainable to give back, but also give more than what we took. So they create this kind of a filter to make sure if a project is regenerative or not. So they're not only considering the carbon footprint that is usually the one that we think about when we're thinking about regeneration, but also the ecological footprint and the water footprint. So according to that framework, we can filter and make sure if a project is regenerative or not. And they have different examples that I can show you in a moment. But this, in the side of the screen, were my effort for at least 3 months trying to create from scratch indicators to measure regeneration in companies. So I have to go back and investigate what is an indicator, what is the standard, how we can evaluate it, how frequent, what data do we need to collect that information and measure regeneration. But there were many problems when I was presenting this, and each screenshot is a different version of the indicators I was trying to create, because first, they were over complex, like the ones that I'm showing right here. For example, some are for the tourism industry, other one is for the forestry. And the units or the calculations that need to be done, I'm not think that realistically corporate sector or private sector is gonna do. So the feedback I was getting from 2011 team was, it's good, it's new because we have different approaches to understand this measurement, but in practical terms, the companies are not going to really apply them because they're really complex and hard to implement. So we can give it to them, but then they're not going to really use them. So the initial approach that I was suggesting was not really accepted. So I was doing my research and understanding who has this authority internationally to talk about regenerative development. So I found Christian Wall is familiar for exactly. So Daniel Christian Wall is talking about in a book called Regenerative Cultures. He's talking about different stages to achieve regeneration. So first, let's say I'm translating this to companies. Companies are doing the minimum, following the regulations, doing things like following the law to operate. But then with a process like 2811 Ventures, it's a kind of acceleration process, then they can make relative improvements. And only if this really happens, one day we can achieve neutrality. And when we talk about neutrality, I'm going to show you in a moment, is when we talk about these sustainable development goals, this sustainability. And if you see in this scale, sustainability is not really like an aim. And it's not the end. We need to continue to promote restoration and finally regeneration. The problem or the limitation is that for this acceleration process, we only had 3 months to make something for these companies and help them to guide them, teach them how to evaluate what they're doing. So actually, realistically, in 3 months, we can only make them move from complying with the minimum and start achieving relative improvements. So then the task is huge. Some limitations. So first, the one that I already mentioned, the program is only 3 months. Second, when I was starting working with 2011, I started working with Carlos. Then Carlos was started working for the government of Colombia because he was doing an amazing job. So they took him, and then I was working with Manuel, and then Manuel left, and then I was working with Sebastian. So you can see many different leadership changes. While this project was being implemented, that was quite challenging to follow and to see what I can be contributing. Also, because of the same reason, the access of like real-time access to the information and to the entrepreneurs was also limited. When I was in Colombia, I only went to Colombia less than 1 month because I am a Fulbright scholar. So there was this restriction for me not to be outside of the United States more than 1 month. So that's one of the reasons why I was not able to stay long and do more field work directly. And also, as part of my research, I was showing you in the initial framework, my idea was to talk with different investors. This one, doing the different interviews so that I can understand investors. And my initial goal was to talk with 10 investors, but then my committee told me that it was really not realistic. So that was another limitation. And investors are really easy to talk and make these kind of interviews. So those were my personal limitations at that point, but also in the 2011 Ventures program. This acceleration program depends on external funding, like sponsors. So they are really reliant on that external support, which make questionable, like how long we can keep doing this. Also, only 20 ventures could be accelerated as part of this from this sponsorship. And other limitation, when companies that are getting these products for free, were getting this support, there was not a commitment for long term for them to keep reporting and contributing to the program for it to continue. So I wanted to show you the map. I went to Colombia for sure, specifically to Bogotá and Medellin. I was born in Rio Negro, but it's close to Medellin. So it was a great opportunity to go back connect with different institutions. In Medellin, I went to the Impact Hub. In Bogota, I had the chance to connect with the Innovation Center for Universidad de Reboleda. I graduated from Universidad del Rosario, so also I had the chance to connect there with different entrepreneurs because I wanted to listen which were the limitations of entrepreneurs when they want to contribute to create this regenerative development. Also, here some more context about 2011. The organization is a big corporation, so they are just connecting these efforts to progress towards this regenerative development. And as I was mentioning, they were initially established in Chile, start in 2016, then Colombia, Germany, but they also have their director here in the US. So, first thing was what I was planning to do. Here's what really happened. So, first, to give you this context about businesses in Colombia. In Colombia, it's not mandatory to report what companies are doing, only if you are a big corp as 2011, or if you are a big company or a big society that are companies with purpose. Those are the companies who have to report, it's mandatory for them. For the rest of the companies, and I was checking statistics from the chambers of commerce, checking how many companies are big corps, how many companies are big companies, how many are both of them. So in Colombia, only 10% of all the companies are or big corps, which is really low percentage, but are the ones that are really reporting about this kind of their progress in terms of impact, sustainability. And because the grant that 2011 got to do this process was asking them to focus on climate action and gender equality, those two SDGs. So I'm going to show you who they were in a moment. But first, I wanted to give you this screenshot of what is happening in these two SDGs in Colombia, like which ones are improving and which ones are declining. So, for example, the ratio for female to male labor force, that percentage is the only one that is going down. The other ones we can see that is improving or keeping the same, but these ones that are in gray are the ones that we do not have the data to know how it's happening. So as I was mentioning, this criteria to report about my performance as a company is not something mandatory, which makes that companies are not taking it as an important thing to do. The methods I use for my field practicum were informal conversations and structured interviews, stakeholder mapping, and also secondary data analysis. So now I'm gonna go to my contextual conceptual framework. This is the new one. Do you remember the first one? This is the improved version of it. So first, the challenges that I was mentioning that the entrepreneurs are facing, and the reason why they feel that it's hard for them to contribute for this regenerative development, for sure, limited knowledge, limited funding or connections, the regulatory or legal constraints. Most of the Colombian economy is informal economy, but still the ones that are legal, all the regulations are really challenging. It's really hard for them to attract and retain talent, and also they don't have the skills, expertise, or experience enough to grow and thrive. Though the ones that you can see right now are the sponsors that were supporting this process. So as sponsors, we have WWF and SBX that are Canadian corporation, and also funding coming from this international organization in Colombia. Climate Kick was mainly a partner. They were not giving funding. And again, because 2011 got this through a grant, they have to comply with different emphasis, that was gender equality and climate action. So I was trying to cover that in my field practicum. So here we can see the different stages to achieve this regeneration according to Christian Wolff. And here you can see more in detail. This is like an interpretation of how this is working. So currently we are in a degenerative development. So here is like the first approach that I was mentioning. Like organizations are doing the minimum, just complying with the law. Then they make relative improvements. That is what is here identified as a green. Then when we found sustainability is right in the middle, is when we talk about neutrality. Then restorative, and here we're coming to the regenerative development area to finally be considered like regenerative. So, but in the case of 2011, as I was mentioning, only we're moving from first stage to the second one. So from the data collected of this process, I use those insights to focus on my contribution. So to give you the generative objective was how can I enhance or improve this acceleration process for companies so that it can be not only sustainable, like in the long term, but also more impact for the ventures and help Colombia to move towards this regenerative development. So the first way to contribute was suggesting different indicators related to climate action and gender equality. So you remember I was trying to do this kind of indicators from scratch. They didn't like them. I understood the reasons. So by talking with different investors, that here are the methods that I was using. And let me show you. What was the result? I noticed having this conversation with 7 investors or people with this experience in Europe, North America, and Latin America, is that most of them knew something called the Global Reporting Initiative. Is it familiar for anyone here in the room? Okay, it was not too familiar for me too. Like I have seen it before, but I was curious, like why these organizations that are the ones who have the money know this very well. So I was thinking maybe I was losing a lot of time trying to create indicators from scratch when there is already something that they already know and understand. Maybe it's just needed a connection between what companies, like small companies in Colombia, are doing and use those indicators so that investors can take their decisions understanding those performance or evaluation standards. So here what I did was to separate the SDGs that they wanted to focus, and I checked the data about the companies who were accelerated by 2011 ventures, and I noticed that they were in 3 main sectors: tourism, agriculture, and circular economy, all of it. So, okay, now I have sectors, and I know that they have to be connected with those SDGs. So what I did is to understand what this Global Reporting Initiative is about, and then suggest which ones are the indicators or the standards that we should be advising the companies to use in order to track and evaluate their progress. So that's where actually what I did. So that's what you can see, and I'm going to show you more in detail in a moment. But first, I want you to give you a little more context what Global Reporting Initiative is. First, I wanted to make sure that this was not something biased, like owned by a company that's connected with oil sector, right? So first, they are an independent non-profit organization, and they start as a shared effort of 3 organizations, 2 non-profits and 1 that is part of the United Nations. And their goal was to promote this transparency and responsibility in business to be sustainable in the 3 triple impact areas like economic, social, and environmental. The first GRE standards, like as a whole, were published in 2016, and from then there have been different updates, and that's one thing that I also like, because Then if I create my own indicators, then in some years that's not gonna be really like applicable anymore because things are changing so fast. So the good news about GRE or Global Reporting Initiatives that they're having these standards that are changing and are being updated every certain years when things are in the industry and the conditions in the world are changing. Other thing that I really like is the fact that, for example, if I am a company and I want to report my progress and my impact, I have to belong to a club, like big corps or big companies. And only then I have a criteria. In the case of big corps, I do an evaluation and then I have a score to know how am I performing, how am I advancing. But if I am not a big corp, because again, there are many regulatory legal constraints, knowledge gaps, then what I can do. So this initiative is giving access for free for these indicators. So as a company, I don't need to pay them or ask them for permission to use these standards to measure what I'm doing, if I am progressing or not. So this is helping companies to assess their progress and communicate in an effective and like widely known way for the private sector. They can improve the relationship with the stakeholders. I want to show you like a little bit how they were creating these indicators. And also we can identify different opportunities and reduce risk in these companies. So also is a third party or an independent body, the one who creates these indicators and evaluate those indicators, and it's the Global Sustainability Standard Board. And they are the one who develop these indicators. So let me show you. These two were the two nonprofits that came together in 1997 to start with this Global Reporting Initiative in connection with the United Nations Environmental Program. So it was like a stakeholder cooperation. So if we check the mission of a Global Reporting Initiative, it's like they envision a sustainable future enabled by transparency and open dialogue about impacts. This is a future in which reporting and impacts is common practice by all organizations around the world. As provider of world most widely used sustainable disclosure standards, we are catalysts for that change. So, and also they're explaining why they're doing this and why they're giving it for free. Because then if we just create and then we ask you to pay, then we're limiting the access and the use for this kind of indicators. So here you can see like a general timeline of how they start creating different guidelines about different sectors, about different topics, so that organizations, not only companies, can track and measure their progress. So each year you see something happening. The last and what are known as universal standards were published in 2021. So there were different like adaptations that were done. So before the GRE indicators, we're using this kind of 101 for the main indicators. Then GRE1 and GRE103 for like in terms of sectors, in terms of topics. And then I want you to pay attention for the topic specific standards, 200, 300, 400, because we're gonna see now with the ones that I select for the companies. So one moment, I need to go back. So this is a most updated version. So before they have GRE 101, 102, 103, that was replaced by the universal standards GRE 1, 2, and 3. And then they have 40 sectors, 40 prioritized sectors to help them to evaluate their performance. And then they are organized by topic. So you can see here that for the gender equality, I was suggesting GRE 400 that are here like social. And here, the ones that are connected to climate action are 300. Are the ones that are categorized in specific standards for the topic of environment. So are hundreds. So you have many options, but the good thing about the way that I can, as a company, can report my performance, that they make it so simple that then you feel motivated to keep tracking and reporting your performance. So that's about the indicators. Again, indicators that investors know. And why is important that investors know? Because at the end, as a company who needs investment, I need to talk the language of investors. So first, indicators. Second, objectives, opportunities and strategic areas. And this second objective was focused on what I can be giving or advising the ventures to focus so that they get the support they need to grow and increase their impact. So the opportunities that I identify many, but I wanted to highlight these three. First, and this was a conclusion that I shared with the team of 2811 Ventures last year. I was analyzing what was happening in the world with the Conference of Parties. One that was in Colombia, other one that was in Azerbaijan. Things that we have been noticing that are we really reaching the funding goals for climate funding, all these needs that we have to fight for climate change? So my conclusion was like, no, we cannot trust public funding because we can see what has been happening with these comparison parties. We're not reaching the funding goals that the countries are claiming to need in order to fight the current situation. So then the opportunity is to focus on private funding. And this was before things that are happening this year. So there was a way to see it coming. And yes, we cannot trust only to depend or rely on this kind of public funding. So that was the first area of opportunity. We should be noting and understanding how we can get private funding. But to get this private funding is necessary collaboration between different stakeholders. I'm not saying nothing new, but what I noticed at least for this research was that I was identifying organizations working and with the focus of regenerative development in different parts of the world that 2011 didn't have idea. So I was having this conversation with the team, mentioning, oh, do you know this organization that is doing exactly what you're doing, but in this other part of the world? And I was noticing, hey, if there are these kind of calls for organizations to cooperate and get this private funding, if they don't know each other, they cannot create proposals together and collaborate, then get this private funding that is getting each time more hard to get. So it's going to be harder for 2011 to have it by its own. But if 2011 know the other organizations that are working in the same line of action, then there are higher chances that they can get this funding. So in terms of what, and I'm going to show you something really interesting I found about impact licensing. That is a way, again, this collaboration can create innovation and make these companies grow. But I want to mention this first. The patterns and doing qualitative coding by listening to these investors, the key concept areas that were mentioning over and over were business model for the companies. So actually there is something called the Regenerative Index. You can Google it and find it. What they do is to evaluate the business model of companies, and then they give you a score, like punctuation of how well are you advancing in terms of regenerative development. So, but it's really expensive. It's done in Europe, and then if I have to pay for that, then if I want to update, I need to pay again. So it doesn't make sense for a company in Colombia to be having to pay for this kind of index to have that information. So in this kind of index, for example, they focus on business model, like the value chain, the partners, the logistics, or everything related with the business model of the company, so that they can give you that final score in terms of regeneration. So business model is central for investors. That's the way to know if they can invest in you or not. That's one of the things that 2011 was focusing in this acceleration process. Other thing that was common in this conversation is scalability. So the problem with some of the organizations in the context of Colombia is that they are feeling fine, like just in the way that they are currently are. So not all of them are looking for growing or exporting, and it's okay. But in terms of increasing the impact or contributing in a big way to regenerative development, then scalability is important. How easy is to replicate the solution in other places. So scalability is other things that impact investors are looking for sure, that they don't see that you're doing the same that everybody's doing. So the innovation in terms of product and service is a common pattern that I was not seeing that in their comments. And they were mentioning many, but I wanted to highlight these ones. I'm going to be closing with the one of knowing how to secure funding from your business model, like your income, not depending on external investment or sponsors for sure, but they want to see how effective is your capacity to implement this kind of regenerative projects. Because if they trust you 1 million Colombian pesos, like 200 something US dollars, if you're not able to perform and implement that small amount good, they're not gonna trust you the millions. So really what is needed for these ventures is to have the capacity, the experience, the knowledge to implement this kind of funding, investment. Otherwise, it's gonna be really hard for the investors to trust. And we need data and reporting. So about the impact licensing, that is for me was more the aha moment, is that companies are looking for investors so that they can get money, so that they can maybe develop a new technology and innovation and increase their capacity and their impact. But this impact licensing initiative that is based in the European Union, mainly in Belgium, is changing the rules. It's saying, like, there are these technology sector who are creating a lot of patents so that nobody can touch their knowledge, their development, their innovation. But what about if we can have a legal way that organizations can use these patents by a license and have access to this innovation? Because what is the point of innovating and then I am creating a patent so nobody can use it, right? So in this way, organizations can have access to this knowledge, this innovation, these technologies for good. And here, Güechá is the success case of this. So they are empowering communities, like reducing the risk of this, the cooking, like the emissions from the respiratory disease in communities, because the traditional way of cooking, what are you doing is connecting the innovation of solar panels that can collect hydrogen and using that hydrogen to give the communities a more renewable, like clean energy source to cook without all the side effects or health effects of the other kind of cooking. So it's like, hey, we can actually build more innovation, better impact, if we allow organizations through a license so that they don't need the money, they can use the license, right? So this was amazing to know. Here I was just sharing like a little bit about what they're doing. By 2030, they want to enable 100,000 families each year to access renewable hydrogen to cook on cooling purposes. And now there is a whole conversation about how we can store this energy, etc., etc. But those are innovations that we can be developing by giving access to this kind of technology. And my last objective was, okay, how can I improve the program as a whole, like 2011 ventures? That was my specific objective, number 3. So it can be more relevant and effective for the ventures. So here, like 3 main points. First, in the first cohort, they were applying the same indicators for every single company that were mainly focused on knowledge. Like, oh, did I know this? Now I know it. That kind of pre and post evaluation in terms of knowledge or awareness or skills. But then in terms of the performance of the company, we needed to understand the sector. So the way that this process can be improved for the new cohorts of 2011 ventures is creating sector-specific indicators like the ones I was suggesting. And if there are different sectors, we have the advantage that the lower reporting initiative already have that classified for us. So they have 40 sectors we can accommodate. Then track the progress like post-program, because the company received this acceleration process for free, those 20 ventures in Colombia. But then the process was done, and the connection with the companies, what is happening after. And I have a personal connection with this because for sure when I was in Colombia, I was promoting all my network. I went to these events, spaces to make know people that they can have access to this kind of training and support because it also includes mentorship, etc. And two of my friends in my entrepreneurship network end up being part of 2011 Ventures. So I know how has been things after the process because I have them on LinkedIn, different places. So Wittiman is one. He was with me in the Young Years of the Americas Initiative Wildlife Scholarship in 2023. And he has a venture focused on agriculture and aquaponics. So then he was in Amsterdam in different accelerators in Europe, growing the innovation of his business. I was like, wow, like this. And then the other friend I was noticing in social media were closing these deals with the Embassy of Australia, giving and creating these projects for communities in La Guajira, in Colombia. It's like, wow, like great things are happening. And those are the ones that have close connection, but there is not this tracking of what is happening after the program is over. So, okay, what about if we can ask the companies that are getting this for free to commit to report their data like 1 or 2 years after they close the program and contribute to make the program better? So actually, I went back and asked the companies, like, okay, some of them, I asked, okay, how this process could be better. And then they said, okay, we want it to be longer. We want the mentorship to last more. Like that they check on us. And I say, okay, both of them can win. Like the ventures can win, and also 2011 ventures, because if companies see the results that companies are getting after this kind of processes, then why not a company would be willing to pay to be part of this kind of process instead of getting it for free? Because at some point we cannot keep depending on external funding. But actually that was my last point here. It was like, okay, we need to make this self-sustainable. So not making less reliant on external funding from international cooperation that is not like certain. So at some point by them documenting, reporting what is happening after the cover is over, we can be getting this more like external support. And in conclusion, in terms of regenerative development, there is not a consensus about what regenerative development is, and that's part of the problem. Because if we don't agree on what it is, then it's really hard to know how we're going to be measuring what regenerative development could be. So that's why the use of these kind of global accepted international indicators is really key in terms of evaluating our progress and helping to track how are we advancing towards regenerative development. And finally, these organizations like 2811 Ventures have a key role of connecting and supporting this ecosystem so that we can focus on having in a transversal way topics like gender equality and climate action. I wanted to show you something that was my own definition, but connecting different points of different science articles. When we talk about regenerative development, we need to talk about systemic change. And now I want to show you something that is involved the different complex relationships, interdependencies, feedback loops. It incorporates interdisciplinary methods and ideas to support the restoration, improvement of the ecosystems, social, economic, environmental. and implies the utilization of resources to enhance the society welfare in a manner that strengthens the support that the system requires for future development and growth. So those are like 3 key points I was taking from different articles. But you know, even if it's really hard to have an agreement about regenerative development, this is something for me is really clear, and I think we can make an agreement about this. So I use the two-loop model. Some parts of the sources are not visible in the presentation, but are right here. So I use this two-loop framework from Berkana Institute that is saying, like, you know, we are in a dominant system that has different strategies that actually are projected to be disappearing in the future. At the same time, we have different pioneers that will be like, could be in the past the ones who are like supporting sustainable development. Then we have these pioneers creating these networks. So I see 2011 Ventures in this role, like connector, acceleration as a catalyzer of this change. Then we have the emerging system that in this case, and the things in purple, I add them because this is a different framework. So but I find it useful to understand this. So is sustainable development that, as was mentioning at the beginning, is not enough anymore. So it's just helping us to transition. And then only if we can really connect the different stakeholders, actors, we can cooperate, we can aspire to have this regenerative development, that it will be the new dominant system, hopefully. So, okay, we don't have to agree what is regenerative development, but we can agree on what we should be doing in terms of connections and this kind of catalyzers, so that we can create these communities of practice, nourish, having this influence, and at some point we can get this regenerative development. So I cannot close without mentioning the organizations that made this possible. So for sure, the MVP, my master program, 2011, the TCD, the Jacqueline Field and Jonathan Field International Travel Fund, Fulbright, and the University of Paris. So thank you. And here you can see my committee. Dr. K was my chair. As a member, Dr. Dale Brach and Dr. Kraft. As members of the 2011 team, Carlos Acuña, Manuel Vargas, Sebastián, from leadership changes. I wanted to mention all of them. Martin Leal, Waldo Soto, Gabriela Carrasco, that was actually the co-founder. My professors, Andinos, Glenn Galloway, Leandra Merz, Renata Serra, Dr. Julie Nelson, John Day, that actually is and classmates who helped me with the peer review, Sydney, Danielle, and Veronica. And here I have a picture. Here is Wittiman, the one that I was mentioning, that's doing aquaponics. And you can scan this QR code to see all my references if you want to check it out. And also, I have all my networks. If they have any questions.